these people over at the Corrections Unfiltered, where corrections meets conversation. Very fortunate tonight. We have Sandra Hijar. She's had 33 years in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. She started out as a correctional officer, and she worked her way up to higher levels of responsibility. And she just recently retired, I believe, in December 2024. Right, ma'am?
Yes.
Well, ma'am, you got the whole gang here. You want to go ahead and kind of give us a rundown on your career and what got you started in corrections and what got you to the end of the road in it?
Yeah. Well, thank you all for having me. I've been looking forward to it ever since I started watching the podcast. And so thank you for having me again. 33 years, and I'm sure all of you can share this. It went really fast. Our careers, one moment you're trying to figure out what key opens what door. And then the next day you're bidding farewell to, your family, your professional family. So I started my career in 91 as an officer, at El Paso camp. And before that, I will tell you, I had no intentions of working for the Bureau of Prisons. After I graduated from college, my intentions were to go to law school, uh, but I did not want to go into debt. And my parents, said, "Hey, that next degree is on you." So I said, "Hey, I'm gonna work a little bit and save some money, and then I'll go back." I was accepted to St. Mary's Law School in San Antonio, but and I never went back. I started my career and just loved it. I am a second generation Bureau of Prisons employee. My father worked for the Bureau. So that's really what got me interested in trying corrections. And I will tell you, back in 91, there weren't very many women working in the Bureau of Prisons. When I started, I was only one of two female officers at my first institution. So that in itself was a little intimidating, but I was welcomed with open arms by my brothers. After that, I promoted into case management. I was a case manager for about 4 years. Then unit manager. At that time, I transferred to Rivers. Then I did a couple years there. Then I decided to put in for executive assistant, and I remember I put in for Big Spring, Seagoville, and Dublin. Now, I put in for FCI Dublin thinking I'm never going to get that, and I don't really want it. But hey, you're young, you're just putting in and seeing what sticks, right? Well, that's the one I got. So, from Three Rivers to FCI Dublin, and I literally spent a big chunk of my career there in the Western region. I worked at Dublin as exec, then promoted to regional executive assistant in the Western region. Then I went back to Dublin as associate warden, then transferred to La Tuna as associate warden, and I was in-house there at La Tuna as warden.
Well, congratulations.
During COVID. I was a COVID warden. So, again, 33 years of just a wonderful career. And again, I like to say that I've been in the Bureau. I was in the Bureau since I was 5, as a Bureau child, moving all around the U.S. and, experiencing corrections as a kid.
Yes, ma'am.
So that is my little story there.
Nice. Hi, Sandra.
Hello.
Welcome to Corrections Unfiltered. Full transparency. I had the pleasure of working with Sandra as we both served as wardens together in the same region. And as we joke and say in the Bureau of Prisons, a small world. And I look forward to having a conversation regarding females in corrections and females in correctional leadership. So that said, I'm going to ask the first question. As previously stated, you retired as a warden. You worked through the ranks, started as a correctional officer. But can you break down some of the inaccurate assumptions out there regarding females in corrections or females in correctional leadership? For example, I wholeheartedly do not believe this, but I believe there is some male bias out there. And some would argue women are physically weaker and can't hold their own in a fight, or they may fall prey to a sexual assault or rape, or they can't handle the mental challenges in an all-male prison environment. What do you say to that?
there may be a little validity to that, obviously, I was never, one to say, hey, I'm gonna be right there in the front and, I'm gonna take down that inmate myself. Obviously the physical aspects of being a female are certainly not anything in comparison to the male gender, right? But I will tell you, there were many, many times in my career as an officer, in middle management, and then finally in the executive staff ranks, that being a female came into play and it was important, and I was able to contribute because I was able to ask specific questions that that my male counterparts, did not think of. And it was that opportunity to ask those questions and to let the guys know, hey, we need to think about X, Y, and Z before we move forward. Really, at the end of the game was like, hey, yeah, we didn't think of that. Thank you for letting us. First of all, thank you for stopping us and moving forward, and thank you for bringing up those very important things that we didn't think about. So I think in general, we women tend to like look at things from a different perspective, obviously. And then, hopefully we have the courage to say something and step up and say, hey, have we thought of this? Because there's a different way to address this issue, this problem, this situation. So I think that right there is invaluable. And then I will tell you from working in, the agency has changed so much. The last 15, 20 years, the agency just took a tremendous change. And I really honestly believe that women's ability to be a little bit more empathetic with situations really fell in line with the changes of the agency, especially with, all the last minute changes that we experienced, Chris, with, PREA, with transgender, with, all the, the female, inmate policies that came out in the last 15, 20 years. So we were able to help out and contribute to understanding those changes, and certainly finding it easier to help implement those changes. So, and I will tell you, as far as being accepted, and I had no problems in 33 years with my male brothers, no problems. In fact, they were my biggest champions. I will tell you that the problems that I had were with women. And not problems per se, but issues that came up in my career. They were unfortunately with my sisters, not with my brothers.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish more women would take that leap and try corrections as a career. It's a wonderful, wonderful platform for women, I believe. And certainly the sky is the limit for anyone working, in the Bureau of Prisons. And hopefully, as things are hopefully changing back. And, I wish I would have stayed a little bit longer to see those changes. But, we were once the best in corrections, and we fell from that. And hopefully, hopefully the Bureau can gain that prize, that status again. But yeah, it's again, if any female asks me, hey, what do you think about working for the Bureau of Prisons? I'll be the first one to let them know, absolutely, go for it. It is a wonderful agency for women.
I wanted to throw a different perspective into the mix there. I started at USB Lompoc in 1989. At that time, in penitentiaries, there were female staff, but they were only support services. I don't know what it was like at Atlanta or Leavenworth, but where we were, male, the main corridor would meet female staff that went down to medical services and all that. And we would escort them to where they were going. And inmates that were there were so aggressive that when in 1992 they said that they were introducing female correctional officers to penitentiaries, I for one was like, oh, that's a big mistake. This is going to be terrible. We're going to have female staff being assaulted, sexually assaulted, and we're going to have riots every open movement because the inmates were just terrible. There was no other way to put it. If they saw a female, it was insane the way they acted. We were in fear. There was no, perception that they shouldn't work there. We thought it was dangerous. Fast forward, I go to La Tuna for 2 years, almost to the day, and I end up at Terre Haute, which is like if you've ever been to either one of those institutions, they're same design. It's like walking into the same institution, except Terre Haute only had their units were only 2 tiers high and Lompoc was 3. And there were female correctional officers there. And some of the best that I worked with in penitentiary environments. I don't know, Pete, you were a lieutenant, Chris, you were a lieutenant. First thing I did when I got on shift, I got the roster out and I started going down who I had where, because I wanted to make sure I knew where my key components were, who I wanted, if I needed to do an escorted trip or anything happened, want to know where, and it didn't matter what gender they were. I had solid staff that represented both. And I used to go back and think, here I was thinking that all hell was going to break loose when they brought female staff into penitentiaries, and it couldn't have been more, I couldn't have been more wrong. So I always go back to that and how you perceive things going forward. I will say this, and it kind of goes to what you were talking about, Sandra, is I feel like the agency, I don't think they did it in particular or did it knowingly, but they kind of pitted male and female staff against one another, where there was a kind of an undertow where they trying to, cause static or a problem where there wasn't one. Because as you referenced, I had my bureau sisters and my bureau brothers, and we were a family, and there wasn't this, oh, you're the enemy. But I felt like the bureaus at a certain point kind of reached this point where they made it that way or tried to make it that way. And most of the time people saw through it and we had a common cause. We had a mission. We had the mission was to keep the lid on the institution and get us through the day without somebody getting hurt. So you were talking about that. It kind of brought up those feelings for me and reminded me of the way it was at that time.
No, I will tell you, like I said, my brothers were my biggest champions, but I will tell you, uh, that I know that they all said, "Hey, you're gonna earn it." You know, when I moved to Three Rivers, I was about 27 when I promoted as a unit manager, 26, 27, and I had the honor and the pleasure of working with the best leaders at that time. Okay. I'm going to drop some names. Okay. Andy Matavosian was a little GS 9 lieutenant. Frank Latta was a little GS 9 lieutenant. Michael Carvajal was a little GS 11 lieutenant. I had the honor and the privilege of working with those 3 men, but they made me work for my bones, so to speak, right? You're going to earn your bones. They were tough on me. And I always tell them, I said, you guys were really tough on me. There were some days where I would go home and I would cry. I was like, oh my God, they were so mean, but mean. It was that tough love. It was that tough love to prepare me for that institution, for that type of inmate, and certainly for my future. They were my biggest champions, mentors to this day, friends to this day. Maybe the perception, Rick, like you're saying, that the pitting, but yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We knew that we had a common mission, and I think especially all the men that I work close with, they recognize my strengths and certainly my weaknesses, and they have helped me, and they helped me throughout, the entire game. So, and I think that still stands true today. for women, in the Bureau of Prisons.
Yeah, 3 good guys you mentioned there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Andy's still working for the Bureau.
Yes, he is.
Still jobbing. Yeah, yeah. Frank Lara, though, he's soft. He's a good dude. Good dude. I'm just kidding. Very good guy. I could throw this in there. I met my true love there, working in prison,
Yeah.
when I went back to Lompoc as an associate warden, she was there. My first inclination was I liked her style. I liked working with her. She was hardcore. She was, like you said, she was level headed. She would keep a lid on things, and I had mad respect for her. Of course, I still do, she brought so much to the game, especially in an institution. And, at that time in 2004, Lompoc was off the chain. I mean, it was nutty. I didn't even recognize the institution when I got back there. When I left in 92, it was crazy. When I got there in 2004, it was bonkers. So, just to see, you say, oh, it's a male environment. It's not. It's male inmates, but it's not a male.
Sandra, I have another question. So I think research has shown that females are extremely effective in their positions and they excel in the correctional setting. And like you said, they bring tools and advantages to the job over their male counterparts. And it has been in my experience, females have the tendency to use a style of policing, which is based on communication rather than, say, physical force. So, in other words, they have communication skills that diffuse situations that could have led to violence. Would you agree?
100%. I kind of add a little twist to that, and then just me, Sandra. I'm very maternal, like very maternal, and throughout my entire career, uh, my brothers and sisters were actually my children, or there was a little bit of that certainly became as a big help to me as far as my communication and my interaction with subordinates, peers, and supervisors. um I always loved to take care of people, whether it was my boss or whether it was, my subordinates. And that I will tell you, you do see a lot of that with women. It's that little maternal thing, which helps with the communication and diffusing issues, problems. So it certainly helped me tremendously. In fact, my nickname, I let you know, was Mama Hijar.
One thing in the Bureau of Prisons, everyone probably has a nickname. Good, bad, or indifferent, they have a nickname.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, in my case, I came into corrections late, and women were already embedded in the facility. I found it. They're in some cases they're a little more calculated. Sometimes think a little more out of the box than the males. So I totally agree with what you say about diffusing a situation. I've seen it. I would have to say more times it'll be in the woman's favor than in the male's favor on defusing or de-escalation. Maybe it's the woman's touch or just the soothing of the voice. I don't know, but I've worked with a few that literally saved my butt a couple of times, and I could just remember stepping back and making eye contact with her, and she'd just shake her head like, stop. And it was a good thing for me.
Yeah.
It was a good thing for me, but and now that I'm thinking, I would say probably 30%, 40% of my training was from the females. I did learn a lot. And like I said, now like I can think about it, and it's funny, the things that you say that come back to my mind, and you're just spot on. I mean, from a female's perspective, that's probably why you understand more than I would. But yeah, you bring up some great points. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And you've all probably seen it. The people outside corrections, the public perception is that there's this, oh, it's a tough guy environment and all that kind of stuff. And we all know that that's not true, because if it was all about hand-to-hand combat and, one-on-one confrontations and all that, we would lose institutions every day, every institution every day, because it's just not that way. The power of your verbal communications or your ability to Jedi mind trick or however you want to say it, deal with people, to size people up, not physically, but mentally, and what it is that's going to, get the desired result is how we survive every day. And I think that, um, bringing, having both genders in an institution and remembering that we're a collective family, that we have a collective mission, was the best part of working together, and not looking at it like, don't call her or don't call him. Conversely, I never worked in a female institution, but I did, site visits to Danbury, and I never did go to Dublin, but I went to Danbury, and you talk about, wow, feeling uncomfortable and having uh, it just blew my perception away of the whole thing. I wouldn't have wanted to work in a female institution, because you have to have a whole different skill set. Am I right, Sandra?
Absolutely. I always tell, my husband's a retired cop, a San Francisco cop. So we like to reminisce and talk about, old times, his old times, my old times. And I used to tell him, I said, I remember going on ICPs, going on staff site visits to USP Atwater, and, staying during the evening watch, staying to speak to the staff on evening watch. And then just, walking throughout the penitentiary, pretty much by myself. It was, two of us that would always take the evening shift, right? And I remember, going onto the yard by myself. And the operations lieutenant was like, do you need someone to go with you? And I said, no, I don't need anyone to go. I said, look, the tower's right there. I'm fine. I'll be just fine. And I never had any concerns. Maybe that was really stupid of me, right? But I trusted the staff that were working, the rec officers, the tower and what have you. But I will tell you, feeling uncomfortable in a female joint as a female, that happened to me. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I always tell my husband, I said, although I worked Dublin twice in different roles, those were my hardest assignments, by far the most exhausting and most challenging assignments was dealing with my own gender.
I worked at a penitentiary that historically did not allow women to go to certain parts of it. I started taking a look at it and the value that every person has, and that's what I realized is it's not a gender specific thing. It's what value do you bring? And like you talked about, I enjoyed the fact that there was a tower on a yard also, and I was walking around as a male in a male joint. I appreciated the fact that there was other people in the perimeter vehicle who was keeping an eye on me while I was walking around in certain areas and stuff like that. So I think it just comes down to really people have to understand what is the attributes that they're bringing. It doesn't matter what gender they come in. It just matters about what do they bring to the table at the time. And I'm so glad to see that we are hopefully moving past that in corrections, because it truly needs to be where we respect people for the value that they bring, because everybody has a place at the table.
How would you compare women's promotions to men's? Do you think women promote faster, slower, or depending on the person? My second question is, out of your whole career, what's the one highlight of your career? The one that sticks out to you the most?
I have many, but to answer your first question, I think I honestly believed in my experience, women did tend to promote faster because there were so few of us. And certainly I like to believe that we women that chose corrections, we were a group of very, talented women that could bring something to the plate, right? So with that being said, talented women, very few of us, certainly when I started and I worked through my career. And then throughout the course of the 33 years, a lot of different positions were created, not necessarily for women, but just in general, So lots of opportunity for women because of the growth of the agency. And then again, just the numbers made it a lot easier to be able to promote, you know? And honestly, I'm a true believer in you know, I yes, I support affirmative action, you know. However, I'm one that truly believes that, those promotions should always go to the most deserving, the most talented, based on merit.
Absolutely.
So hopefully the leaders that selected me throughout my career for promotions, they saw that, not just, oh, here's Sandra Ehar, she's a female, she does okay, let's give her a chance. And then your second question, the highlight of my career. My gosh, I had so many. Probably, it's a highlight, but it was validation for me, I guess, as a leader. And this occurred during COVID. COVID, for those of us, Chris, you went through COVID as a warden. Um, no one we went from a 2-page pandemic plan to, at the end of the pandemic, it was thousands of pages long, right? So none of us had, a how to deal with the pandemic book. And it was, unfortunately, watching your brothers and your sisters fail and taking lots of notes and making sure that that wasn't going to happen to you, and just waiting for the pandemic to hit your institution. Latuna was very fortunate in that, where we're located, we're out in the middle of nowhere in comparison to other institutions. So the pandemic, of course, started, East Coast, West Coast, and it came to the middle, right? And we were hit late in the game. So I had the luck of being able to observe and watch my brothers and sisters go through some horrible times, and try to make sure that that didn't happen at Latuna. But regardless of how much you prepared, you weren't ready, right? So I remember at Latuna, uh I had over 25 inmates in the hospital. It was about 25, 26 inmates. um a good 30% of my staff were sick. Another 20% weren't coming to work because they were afraid of coming to work. Now, you have to remember that Latuna is about 86, 87% Hispanic employees, and roughly the same amount of inmates as far as demographics. So then our culture here at Latuna, there's a lot of employees that have their parents living with them, their elderly grandparents living with them, aunts, uncles, what have you, extended family. So they were afraid of bringing the virus into their homes and killing off their family members. And I'm being, very, very frank. I actually had an officer tell me that I'm not coming to work, warden, because I don't want to kill my grandmother. So, of course, I completely understand, but how we needed the employees to come to work. So I remember being in the command center. It was about 1:00, 1:30 in the morning, with an acting captain. One of my lieutenants, I didn't have a captain at that time, so I'm like, "Tag, you're it." um, Big old Samoan lieutenant. You're, the epitome of strength and valor, and you know, uh, he was. I sat down in my chair, and he was on the phone with the union president, begging him for help. Begging him for help. Please, help us get these staff back to work. We can't run the institution, please. And of course, it wasn't like this. It was, and come on, bro, can you help me out, man? I'll make it up to you. Yeah, but I'll give you, I'll make you an offer you can't refused, I'll take care of you when this is all over. I'll take care of everybody when this is all over. And so I was watching him and I'm like, this man is doing everything. And this is not him. This was completely out of character. He's doing everything to, to help the situation and to help me. I sat back and, yes, brothers, there's no crying in prison, but Mama Ehart started to cry. I was crying. I lost it. And whether it was just months of just, this high, level working, these countless hours. I mean, we would, of course, all of us that went through it, we were leaving work at 2 a.m. and coming back at 6 a.m, just, going home, take a shower, take a little cat nap and go back to work. And I sat back and, I lost it. He turned around. He's like, "Hey, bro, let me call you back." And he comes and sits right next to me and he grabs my hand and he starts to cry too. And together we cried like little babies, the whole thing, boogers coming out of our nose. And then without saying a word, he cleaned our faces off and kept on, he got back on the phone. I started reviewing paperwork. But it was a moment of, it was validation that, uh, after so many years of working for the Bureau of Prisons, all the hard work that I had put myself through, I was able to show this vulnerability, and it was okay. And it was okay. It was okay for me to do that. And I felt like you shared that with me. You shared that moment. And, months later, I'm like, I started talking to him about it and I'm like, are you okay with me talking about this? Because this, this is something I will never forget, never forget. And I want to talk about it because it shows that we're human beings and it shows that, we can cry and it shows that we can show emotion and vulnerability and we're still going to get the job done. So it was a highlight for me, it was like, oh my God, I am resilient. I am one bad mama in a good way. I was able to do this and still be myself and show that, we're human beings and still, get the job done. And my brother here uh, shared that moment with me and was able to be himself and feel that vulnerability with me. So I know that that's probably not what you wanted to hear as a highlight, but I will tell you that was out of all the ups and downs and more ups than downs for sure. That was one right there, that moment, which I'm sure lasted like maybe 15 minutes. I will never forget, never forget. And I thank him for holding my hand and without saying one word, it was going to be okay, Warden, because we're going to get through this together. So that right there just taught me that I was never alone, even though being a warden is a very lonely, lonely, lonely spot to be in, right? A position that, you know, you're out there, you feel very alone, even from your own supervisors, you feel sometimes you're out there in an island all by yourself. And no matter what happens, no one's going to come and save you. But that moment, I felt safe. I felt loved and I felt that, I was going to make it through this pandemic.
I think that's one of the struggles that wardens have is the fact that they don't ever get a chance to really see you as a human being because most of the times you're making your rounds, you're having to hit the spots that you have to go to, see the things that you need to see. Then the phone starts ringing or another appointment comes up or you get called somewhere and they don't get to see that human element of you. And I think, me just looking into it myself is if you're there at 1:30 in the morning, they're obviously seeing the human side of you and the side of you that cares. I do want to talk about that, as far as leadership being viewed as
this, these Teflon characters, nothing happens to them. They can deal with anything. They show no emotion. I will tell you the other most challenging experiences was just losing staff. The last couple years of my career as a warden, I lost 3 staff in a matter of months. And, I will tell you again, there's no little handbook on how to deal with this and how you're supposed to act and what emotion you're supposed to show. Is it enough? Is it not enough? Am I doing the right thing? Am I showing that empathy? I will tell you, and then the guilt as a warden, as a leader. So these incredible emotions that I went through every time I lost those 3 staff. But I will tell you, there was one day where I guess, yeah, I always wear my emotions on my face. Um, and there was an officer that came up to me and he said, "Warden, are you okay? Are you okay?" I remember saying, "No, I'm not okay. I'm not okay." I said, "But thank you for asking. Thank you." And you know, uh throughout those events, my middle management, my chief psychologist, oh, what a wonderful individual, would make sure that she would come and check up on me and ensure that, if you need to talk to somebody, make sure that you get that help. And I think that for any warden, any leader, whether you're an associate warden, doesn't matter. Everyone's a leader, right? When you're going through those real difficult situations, it's super important to understand that it's okay to ask for help and it's okay to want to talk to somebody, and you don't have to hold it in. You don't have to hold it into it, and because that's when it becomes a problem. And
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough, and it's great though that your staff can see that you're putting in the work and you're putting in the time to care to get to know them and share with them. And it's very, very tough. And COVID was a very challenging and difficult time in corrections. Like you said, I mean, just so many people were affected, not just the population of inmates, but also your workforce and the people around you. And there were tragedies that came along the way.
I wish people talked more about COVID. I know people want to forget about that, but I think that was such a monumental period in our agency's history. That was the most difficult and challenging period of the Bureau of Prisons history. And I just felt like toward the end of my career, people wanted to just move on, and I get it. But there were so many lessons learned, as an agency, as individuals, as a family, that, I hope and pray that the agency really, takes a moment and just we don't forget, what happened. We don't forget what we learned, and we certainly, need to talk about it more. Maybe it's just me using this as, they're very therapeutic for me. But I will tell you that during that time, my husband was diagnosed with colon cancer. So I always tell everybody I was dealing with the 2 C's, COVID and colon cancer. And my family broke down. I mean, my 2 young kids, I had my daughter was in high school, or our daughter was in high school at that time, and our son was in junior high. You know, with the Zoom schooling that they had to resort to, the isolation, cancer, the pandemic. Is mom gonna die because she works in a prison? Is dad gonna die from cancer? Dealing with, sick employees and, sick inmates. Yeah, I ran out of tools in the toolbox. I
Yeah.
I I kept it up as long as I could, and I reached out to EAP, and I went through some sessions with my family, with my kids, because, as a mother and as a warden, I was down to my last screwdriver in the toolbox. I needed help. And so I like to talk about that because that is super important as, as a mother and a wife and and a leader in our agency. And I just hope and pray that as the generations continue to make our agency the agency that it once was, we don't forget about that, how important that is to take care of yourself. Because without taking care of yourself, you can't take care of everything else around you, your family, and your bureau family. So yeah, it was something. I will tell you, if and I never used EAP until then. You know, it took 29 years for me to reach out to them, when I know that probably in my life, earlier in my career, I should have done it too. I can think back at moments of struggle, and I should have reached out. But that's that old school mentality that, I can muster through everything myself. I don't need any help. Regardless if I'm a female, I don't need any help. I can do it myself. And that was certainly, that's not a smart thing to do, but out of desperation during those really, really, really difficult moments, that's when I made the decision I can't do this by myself anymore.
What was it that got you through it all? What, if you had to sum it all up, because you're a mother, right? You're a
Mhm.
warden, you're a key figure in many, many people's lives. So what was the drive? What was it got you through it?
I will tell you, I think, at work, it was that maternal instinct really took over. I wanted to, mothers are always there, right? We're there for our kids, our family. So I did not want to be one to let my family down, whether it was at La Tuna or whether it was at home. And and actually the first thing was my faith and and God and my faith, and the fact that, that belief that mothers need to be there for their family. I honestly, I will tell you, I'm like, I remember being so tired, and my kids would tell me, "Mama, you need to stay home. You need to rest." And my husband was being treated at the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland. So he was over there. I was here holding down the fort with the kids, and at work. And I remember my kids telling me, "Mama, you need to take a day off." Because I don't know how, I don't think I went days working, straight through, right? And I remember telling my son, I said, honey, mama's got to keep on, mama's got to work, mama's got to take care of you, mama's got to take care of work, and mama will be okay." And that, honestly, and lots of praying, Pete, lots of praying the rosary. I'm Catholic, prayer. And I will tell you, lots of phone calls to my friends and mentors, just sharing, the different stories that we were, different things that we were going through, and hopefully, gaining some insight. Oh, I'm going to try that. Maybe that will work here. It was our brothers, our sisters, a lot of support, at that time with the leadership. And yeah, I remember getting a call in the height of the pandemic at La Tuna, getting a call from Carvajal, from Director Carvajal, and, you know, shockingly, right? You don't, who gets a call from the director? And, just want to make sure that you're okay. You want to make sure that you're doing okay. And from what I hear, that he would make those calls to the wardens to check up on them. Yeah. So, uh, a big part, I tell my husband, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book. Because these are things that not unique to Sandra Eher. I'm sure there were many other wardens that felt the things that I felt, and went through the things that I went through, and cried. Maybe not with their staff, but you know, in private, but felt those things. Can I get through this? Am I going to be able to get through this, and still have a job too? You know. So yeah, it was. It was something I'll never forget. Um, like I will tell you, I named three of them: Michael Carvajal, Andy Matavosian, Frank Lara. Uh, one big mentor, Michael Benov. He was retired as a warden in the Western region. He was a huge mentor to me and actually introduced me to my husband. So I gotta throw him a kudo there. Uh, yeah, if it wasn't for him, you know, I wouldn't be Sandra Hijar-Leydon with 2 kids. Uh, but yeah, I will tell you, throughout your career, you can actually say that you've had we've all had many mentors, and they're not necessarily your peers or your supervisors. Some of them are subordinates. At the time, Andy and I worked together at Latuna, I was a GS-12 already. He was just a little I always tease him, like, "You're just a little GS-9 lieutenant." But I will tell you, what a smart guy. What a smart guy. And yeah, he became a mentor, you know, a younger individual with fewer GSs than me. So, throughout my career, I could name countless people, that individuals that were mentors to me, at that moment, for a couple of months. And certainly those that are, lifelong friends and mentors to this day. So, but I will tell you, I do want to, one of the things that, you know, maybe we don't like to talk about as corrections, but we learn a lot from our inmates. We do. When I started back in 91, I remember my very first day, I was handed a set of keys, my radio, and that's your unit over there. That was before, on the job training, the 3 weeks that exists now. And I'm like, okay, so there I go. And who were the ones that told me, hey, well, this is what you need to do? It was an inmate. I know I'm like, we don't like to talk about it, but that actually does happen. Hopefully not as much now, but it certainly did in 91 when I first started. Learned a lot from the inmates. But one of the biggest things that I remember learning, and it wasn't a lesson learned, but it was something that I will never forget, that an inmate at USP Atwater told me. I was doing interviews for our institution character profile. This not a big crusty, but very old crusty convict. I mean, we're talking, had done the rounds in probably all the penitentiaries in the bureau. And he came in, or a case manager came in and said, hey, ma'am, this inmate wants to talk to you. I had already, started packing up and what have you. And I said, yeah, have him come in. So here he comes in. He must have been like in his late 60s, early 70s, long hair, stringy hair, tats everywhere, walking with a cane. He comes in, he sits down, and he goes, I have one thing to say to you. And I said, okay. The fish rots at the head. And then he got up, he left, and I said, okay, that can mean a lot of things. Well, we were doing that ICP, and it was months before the homicide at USP Atwater. And after the homicide, I'm like, I I know now what that means. Well, actually, we kind of figured out what it meant after the ICP, during the ICP. And it just validated that, inmates watch everything that we do. They understand, and they hunger direction and structure and leadership, and they want to feel protected, and they want to feel safe. And they, right there with that statement, the fish rots at the head. Absolutely. It's all about your leadership. So watch out,
Yeah, I mean,
They know what's going on. We're standing in the chow hall watching them, and they're watching us, and they know who's running things and who's not. And yeah, they say something like that. That's I guess you do the ICPs. I've participated in the region. They were you do your interviews with inmates because they'll tell you a lot about what's going on.
No, absolutely. It's, you get a lot of everything from an inmate.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Welcome.
they don't have to sugarcoat it.
No, not at all.
Yeah, hopefully we've
Not
learned
at
from
all.
that. Welcome to the BOP initiation. Here's your keys, radio, and that's your unit. I think it was a test. Obviously, it was sink or swim. But in reality, the inmates are, like you said, the inmates are somewhat training the officer instead of the staff training the officer.
You went from correctional officer to warden by earning every step of the way. You set a great example for others. You brought others along. You dealt with one of the most difficult challenges a prison can face, powered through it. You provided the care that they needed because they were going through challenges also. So kudos to you and thank you for your leadership. And we want to say thank you for being here on Corrections Unfiltered. And we're going to do this again, I think, real soon, huh, guys?
I hope so.
Absolutely. That's
All
fun.
right.